Make this session interactive. We want to have you folks talking to us, and we want to have you talking to each other and talking to the panelists, and the panelists interacting as well, as opposed to just you listening and these guys each taking a turn by themselves. That's kind of a little too formal for us. So to make it a little bit less formal, let's have you start getting interactive now. Take a moment right now, pull out a business card, stand up, and introduce yourself to someone you haven't met before. Come on now, come on.
We've done a lot of video streaming, iOS, mobile development. These days we're moving into the VR space, both video, education space,
Okay.
and streaming VR as well.
Okay, thanks.
Can I make a quick 30-second announcement
You go right ahead, sir.
while they're finishing up their introductions? While you're finishing up your conversations with each other, continue that. But just a quick reminder, at 4:15, we will have our final keynote from Google, and that will be in the room next door. The reason I let you know that is because we're giving away a Sling box, the developer box. I think it's almost a $5,000 value, something like that. We're giving one of those away in that final keynote, and you've got to be present to win. So make sure you show up there 4:15 for our final keynote in the Gramercy room right next door. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, well, thanks for participating in that interactive discussion there for a few minutes. All right, guys in the back, are we ready? Audio gentleman, are you ready? That was his title, not mine. All right, let's get started. Welcome to our Streaming Media East discussion on real-world VR and 360-degree use cases. Most folks that have tried 360-degree streaming agree that it's a fantastic way to virtually experience live music and sporting events, as well as destinations and live news. But is it just a fad, as 3D TV turned out to be? Or is it starting to enable and democratize some of the most immersive experiences possible for folks who can't be there in person? Today, our panelists are going to share how companies are using VR 360 today, and then you'll get to decide whether it's a flash in the pan or here for the long term. Folks in the audience, before we dive in, let's do a quick poll so the panelists have a better sense for which topics are going to be most interesting for you. By show of hands, how many of you have tried 360-degree video of any kind? Okay, it looks like about 80% of the audience. How many of you have experienced 360-degree live streaming? And again, whether you're using sort of the magic window of 2D or actually put on a headset. Okay, looks like about half had raised their hands. How many of you have created such an experience for others? Oh, wow. All right, about 25% of the room. And how many of you are considering jumping into creating 360-degree video content? All right, about a fifth of the room. Thank you. All right, well, let's now meet our panel. Each of you, please introduce yourselves quickly so folks know who they're listening to.
Hi, I'm Raj Moorjani. I'm a product manager at ABC News. I focus on emerging platforms and storytelling technology, so I sort of sit at this intersection of art, technology, and user experience, and how that relates to storytelling.
Hi, I'm Sophia Dominguez. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Surf. We're building the first search engine for augmented reality and virtual reality. We like to say that we index all things that don't fit into a rectangle.
I'm Casey Charvet. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gigcasters. We provide live event streaming production and engineering services for professional content creators, and sometimes that content appears in the form of 360 video and hopefully more AR and VR as we go along.
Forrest Key, founder of a company called Pixvana from Seattle, which is building kind of middleware and authoring tools for 360 video and VR in particular. I spent about a decade before that working on both Flash and Silverlight, so I've been doing kind of emerging streaming technologies for a good part of the last 15 years.
Great, thank you. And my name is Chris Knowlton. I'll be the moderator. I work for a company called BlueFrame Technology, the sports broadcasting made easy company. All right, audience, we'd like this to be interactive. So while we could reserve a few minutes at the end for questions, we'd rather you raise your hands if you have a question when you think of it, so that it can just be part of the conversation while that topic that is in your head is still relevant to what we're talking about up here. So feel free to raise your hand at any time. Also, if you ask a question, we're capturing this session for online participants, so we will probably repeat the question after you ask it. And if at any time you cannot hear what one of us is saying or you missed a comment, please feel free to ask us to repeat it. All right, panel, let's come up with a basic question that comes up frequently. I started by asking folks if they had 360-degree video experiences, but are we really talking about virtual reality? Are we talking about 360-degree video or something in between? Who'd like to start?
I mean, it sort of depends on how, as a consumer, you're experiencing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a headset, I think a lot of people think, oh, okay, I'm experiencing VR, right? And if you're seeing something like in a magic window, like on a Facebook news feed or YouTube 360, and you're just like using your finger to swipe around, then that's, you know, I think most people will be like, okay, well, that's 360 video, and sometimes there'll be sort of conflating sort of meanings or definitions of the two. So I think it really just depends on like how you as a user feel and what you're thinking in experiencing that content.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Well, related to that, content creation, if you're planning for your users to consume it as a magic window with your finger, that's going to be a really different creative process in terms of what story you're trying to tell. So I think it absolutely depends on the context for viewing, and obviously upstream from that, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to create for the user. I'm only interested particularly in what I think is much more disruptive and more interesting, which is immersive storytelling. I think the stories we can tell in the headset are transformational and dramatic and revolutionary and really are about empathy and how it feels and how that story makes you feel. I find the kind of magic window thing to be much less interesting personally, although I think it is a lot more practical right now in the industry because there's millions and billions of people that can consume a magic window piece of content on Facebook or YouTube. There's not as many people getting into headsets, so there's a business, correlation that's not in place yet, so that we can actually invest in building really compelling immersive content to an immersive audience. That reality isn't here yet. So as we build the industry, I think we have to kind of think about both. But personally, throughout this next hour, you're going to hear me talking about VR exclusively in the headset, because that's really what my company is all about.
So how does that fit in then with 180-degree video and tricks for adding depth in video, things like that? Who could tell us a little bit more about how that fits into this realm of VR 360? Where does 180 go?
So I don't think that VR 180 is VR at all. I think it's just an evolution of the rectangle. I think that you can watch it without being in a headset and fully understand the grasp of what it is. Yes, you might get like some 3D effect, but just because it's 3D doesn't mean that it's AR or VR, and that's just something to note. They're trying to push it as VR because it looks better in a headset. However, I would not say that it is VR. Okay. That's just my opinion.
I would say that 3D and stereoscopic is one of these things that tricks your brain into kind of suspending disbelief and believing that you're a little bit more immersed in it. So I think it can be an important component. The same with sort of 360 sound as well. We have to kind of layer all of these things together to create that immersive experience. And so 180 can be an okay part of it, especially if you don't have really anything going on behind. But for true immersion, yeah, I think we have about a naturally almost 180-degree field of view. So it's sort of an easy shortcut there.
It's like a stopgap until we can.
For those that don't follow it as closely as we on the panel do, so Google in particular is really advocating for this 180 format. It's a much simpler camera rig, of course. You have two sensors relatively close together, similar distance to our natural eyes, and you don't have to worry about the production issues of the crew and the cables and the other people on set. You can just kind of set up the camera, point it towards the front of the room. Post-production is really straightforward. You use the same post-production techniques and systems. It's really just a video object that has a left-right eye separation. So it's very pragmatic way to kind of like make 360 video, but it's 180 field of view. I agree with you, Sophia. I don't think it's at all VR. That 180, I think actually our natural vision systems is 220 degrees. Otherwise, none of us would be alive because tigers would have eaten us. So, so really that, our brains kind of focus on different parts of our field of view at different times, but we have peripheral awareness past 180 degrees. So when you're in a 180 video in a headset that is only like 90 or 100 degrees, just a little bit of head motion, you start to get to these black areas right out of your field of view. So I actually wish there was a 220 format. I think it'd be a little bit more interesting. It's certainly a lot cheaper to produce than 360, but I agree with you. I think 360 is immersive and compelling in a way that 180 is not. It's just a pragmatism thing to lower the cost of production. And it's backwards compatible to YouTube, so Google loves it because it fits perfectly in the YouTube window.
Right. Okay, thanks. With the definitions out of the way, then can each of you tell us how you or your customers are using VR 360 experiences today?
So from our news standpoint, when we launched about 3 years ago our VR and 360 initiative, we took it, as Forrest was saying, like, the story first approach. Here's, what is not just used as a gimmick or as like a quick sort of like add-on as a marketing or a buzzworthy thing, but what can we do that can really help our viewers understand the story we're covering? So when we launched our first piece, it was called Inside Syria, where we had our Nightline crew go into Damascus and follow this young archaeologists, a team of young archaeologists covering, protecting these Syrian antiquities from ISIS. And so there were many stories sort of like talked about what was happening in Syria and Damascus around that time, but no one like sort of really, really went in there with the 360. We were using the Jaunt GP16, so it was like a 16 GoPro rig, and creating like this 3D 360 piece out of it, and really immerse viewers into what's actually happening down there and be able to sort of follow these archaeologists and have our correspondents sort of like be your guide. And then we did a corresponding Nightline piece and a world news piece, and that you could watch it at home and then put on a cardboard or a headset and then sort of just take yourself there. And that really sort of added a layer of storytelling that wouldn't have been accomplished just if you were just watching it as like a 2-minute hit on the evening news. So it was really like approaching it, what's a strong narrative, and how do we use this technology to sort of enable and take that narrative to the next level.
Okay, great.
So we started indexing 360 content, which is how we got involved in the VR space. And what we did was we looked at very specific sites that were hosting this content. And then we ingested it and not just added more computer vision tags to gather what was inside the content to serve like better related content, but we also assigned a rating to it. And so the rating became increasingly important to us and is our own version of PageRank. And essentially looks at how interesting or how good the content is. And so we can use computers to automatically sort out the bad content. So that's things like poor stitching, poor resolution. Speed is another one. So if you've ever seen a 360 video where you're on a roller coaster or in a car, that automatically gets deducted from the score because it could make people sick. And so that's all tied into the rating, and then anything that could be potentially good is then looked at by humans, and then they have like a 10-page rule book that they sort content through or rate content through. And we were focused a lot on making sure that this content was delivered on any device and so that anyone could experience it, because we saw that most headset consumption wasn't really happening. And so something that we more recently started experimenting with was taking this content and allowing people to walk into a 360 environment. So using like the AR camera, and we've been taking 360 environments and putting them into portals, and not portal like web portal from like Yahoo. These are like portals where you're in the real world and suddenly can like walk into the digital. And that's been doing really well to help explain people like you're supposed to be inside of the content rather than just like swiping around. And so we've been seeing lots of traction there of allowing people to walk into it. So it's not like being in a headset, but it's a step in the right direction.
How are you finding the content? Is it are publishers reaching out to you and saying, here's my content, please include this? Mm-hmm. Or are you actually just doing a global search and finding anything that matches?
Yeah, so it's a bit of both. Like we have certain API partners that have granted us our API because they're like, we want our content to be discoverable. Okay. And then on the flip side, it's also just like with smaller kind of like finding sites that have over 100 pieces of content and like adding those to the index, and then the crawlers go out and do their thing.
Okay, thanks. Casey?
Yeah. So we have clients that span a pretty wide range of verticals. Concerts, sports, motorsports, house of worship. We've seen 360 video production used in almost all of those. And it's sort of led to a mixed bag of results. Concerts, I feel, even though it seems like, wow, that should be a great one, right? I think that a lot of theater and concerts included are staged in such a way that they occupy a narrow field of view. Even if you get very close, the action tends to be kind of right in front of your face. And if you're ever at a concert, you don't spend a lot of time kind of looking behind you unless somebody's spilling beer on you or something like that. So I think simply substituting a 360 camera for a 2D camera in a concert setting is maybe not the right way to go about doing it. I think that there are very powerful ways that the technology can be used in consuming live music, but I think that a simple one-to-one substitution isn't necessarily the way to go, and that there needs to be sort of some more thought poured into it. And this is where sort of augmenting the experience further is I think, a good way to go about it. Places where we've seen a lot of success are clients that are doing some architectural type things, where we've got one that's doing walkthroughs and kind of presenting different architectural spaces. And so they've made very good use of 360 cameras for that. This isn't live in this case. This is sort of like a video on demand play there. One of the areas that I'm personally most interested in is the application in the medical field and patient care field. And I'm still kind of looking and trying to seek out those clients. So if anybody's in that space, let me know. But I think that there's huge applications for live streaming video in terms of patient care in a number of scenarios.
I mentioned it earlier, empathy. I would introduce also the word presence. So what the medium uniquely can do, again, in the headset, for my purposes of talking about this, is give you a sense of presence, and presence creates a sense of empathy. So some people might be watching this through the live stream or the VOD stream of this conference, and they will experience this panel in a very different way than all of you who are here right now. All of you that are here, including some of you on your phones periodically, even when you're on your phone, you have a sense of being here in the physical room with us, a certain accountability to us as a panel, the people around you, et cetera. So you're experiencing this piece of content very differently than somebody watching it in a rectangle. That rectangle, no matter how high resolution it is, no matter how big that rectangle is, we've kind of learned to watch rectangular video as something that's over there, away, afar. So if I'm watching a piece of ABC News and I see that piece of news on a rectangle, no matter how big and how quite high quality it is, I'm not going to have a sense of connection of being present, and therefore much less empathy. The reason I got into this space is I watched one of the New York Times pieces that they did. They were very early in doing editorial content in this space, and they did a piece on the Iowa caucuses. And I watched that in a bad cardboard, little iPhone video. It was super low quality, super fuzzy. But after about 3 minutes of being there at the Iowa caucuses, specifically it was a Republican edition, and I'm from the left coast, so it wasn't my political party. I had a hard time when I took off the headset, not feeling a sense of connection and empathy for the people that I saw at the Trump campaign in Iowa. Whereas if I saw that same piece of content on the news, it would have been really easy for me to be like, oh yeah, those people are crazy. It's a completely different kind of worldview. Experiencing presence with those folks as fellow Americans, seeing them as human beings, having a sense of empathy for things was dramatic. I felt that immediately. And that was 2.5, 3 years ago. The industry's evolved, quality is much better, the headsets are cheaper. All that stuff is evolving towards something that I think we'll see a mass consumer adoption flashpoint. So to me, that's what makes it interesting, what makes it highly differentiated. And those experiences, any experience where being present, having empathy is going to be a differentiator, those are the things that I think will be the early kind of phenomena. For me, with music, I agree with you completely, Casey, that there's not a lot of looking left and right, but when I go to a concert, I really want to have a personal connection to the musicians, to the music performance. And in VR, I feel that connection much more so, frankly, than even I do at a live event because of the aforementioned people spilling beer on you and other things that go on at live venues. And I'm a bit of an introvert.
So less distraction in that case.
I love being able to connect with the artist and really be there. And if the quality of the stream is good and the cameras are placed in the right place, I think it's a very, very compelling way to experience live music events. Anything where presence and empathy would be value add.
Yeah, that's an important point that Forrest makes, like placing the camera in the right place. Perspective is everything. Like, so the concert example, if you're placing the camera in the middle of the audience, well, that's not really that interesting if you can place the camera right on stage next to the performer. That's a unique perspective that you normally, even attending a live concert, would not get.
Right.
And so that's where the power of this technology is, where it can take you to different points of view or different perspectives, provide you different perspectives that you wouldn't normally get.
Yeah, still my favorite 360 video was Run the Jewels music video, and I think it's my favorite because it was the first time that I felt really, really close to another person. Because in the 360 video, it's Run the Jewels. It's shot in black and white, but that was a stylistic choice. And suddenly, like, the entire band just like starts emerging around you, and you're everywhere that you look, like there's something new happening. And I felt like it really, even though it's just black and white, it like utilized the medium in a way to make you feel very close to another human being or like to an artist. At the time, I had no idea who Run the Jewels was, but now I would say that they're one of like the most forward-thinking, you know, bands, if you want to call them a band, or groups. And I think, especially when we've done certain like portal type of experiences, we always try and bring like the character or like a human front and center to make them allow people to like come up to it, because it's not something that you get to do and like, you know, suddenly be sitting next to Bruno Mars. Like, that is a feeling, and using VR and AR, you can evoke that feeling in ways that you can't with what Forrest was saying in rectangular video. Like, rectangular is so passive now, and the way that now when I see a video or if I see a photo, and I'm like, I want to be inside of that, and that's just like how my brain works. Just because we've seen so much 360 content, and it's like I want to be inside of that like environment. Yeah.
Okay. So for which of the VR 360 usage scenarios that you've been talking about are you seeing the strongest growth?
Memes.
Memes, okay.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm sure you know 2018 meme culture is huge, and basically we started to see that there's meme culture in every other medium except AR and VR, and so we started to do a couple different examples where we took a meme. I'll just use this example, which was, I don't know if any of you guys know Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is this cartoon that's, you know, gotten really large in the last couple of years. They did this episode called Pickle Rick, and we made a Pickle Rick experience where he was dancing to the Macarena in VR, and that was our most popular VR experience. And then we turned that into an AR portal that's been viewed over 1.7 million times on Snapchat. So yeah, memes are definitely getting the most traction. Or things, there's other examples that we've done, like Yodel Boy experience, and a few others that have gotten quite a bit of traction, partly because it's like that's what consumers are talking about. And so suddenly, if you can create experiences that are in the same realm, people will share it because it's a new way to experience the type of content that they're seeing in other places.
Cool. Others?
I mean, I think for news, so the way we define news is there's three sort of buckets. There's breaking news, there's live and special events, and then there's documentaries / like magazine style pieces. And we've done a bit of everything. Like in the last 3 years, we've launched over 100 different 360 VR pieces. And what our most popular piece was, someone had this, you know, one of the early like Insta 360 cameras. It was a Ricoh Theta camera, and it was a blizzard happening in New York City, and he walked over to Times Square, held it up above him for like 2.5 minutes. It was just raw 360 video. We posted on Facebook, and it got over 18 million views. And it was at that time like the most viewed 360 video on Facebook, and we couldn't like really understand like, you know, why, but like people were compelled to watch this raw footage of like this blizzard in Times Square. And then we had our follow-up to Syria was this North Korea piece where we sent Bob Woodruff into North Korea, and during like the worker celebration parade. And it was like a 9.5 minute, you know, produced piece. Did very well, over like 5.5, 6 million views. But there was a clip of it that we cut for the parade. It was like a minute footage that we posted it, and you know, Mark Zuckerberg actually shared it on his Facebook feed, so that sort of helped too. And it was just 1 minute of just like raw footage of the parade of people just walking by. That did over like 12 million views. And so we're finding like, you know, like raw footage, like honest, true to the, like, you know, not highly produced, tends to do better on things like Facebook and YouTube, just because it provides an interesting, like, unique perspective that, you know, I think people just crave for.
Yeah. I think it goes down to content being timely. It's the same with all content. So if the content is timely, if it's relevant, and if it's contextual, it will be shared. And so it's just a matter of figuring out what angle that you want to take and which platform you want to share it on, and if it's shareable in that platform.
Just on the other extreme are B2B video examples. So sales organizations building a really high quality presentation There's now these $200 headsets that went on sale last week, the Oculus Go, which is a fantastic form factor. It has built-in headphones. There's only one cable. It's totally self-contained. It does have a little hand remote that you might lose. That's kind of a remaining nuisance. But much more portable, much more cost-effective, very high quality compared to just 2 weeks ago when that same device would have been like a Samsung phone inside of a Gear, and that would have been $1,000. So these are great devices for salespeople, conferences, retail presence, other places where you want to convey something to an audience, not necessarily millions of consumers through YouTube, Facebook, or through your branded app like ABC News or a Disney app, but rather at a conference like this, we could have 10 headsets and we could have an experience that we could present to an audience. So I've seen a lot of applications in pharmaceuticals, hospitality, different kinds of like corporate training. There's a lot of shadow market B2B stuff going on in VR. I think actually there's more commercial and business opportunities there ahead of this kind of mass consumer market because there just isn't the penetration of headsets. So that's a lot of where we've been spending our time as a business.
Okay, we had a question in the audience. Go ahead.
At the very beginning, you started it off talking about whether or not VR AR would be a fad in the way of 3D. And it just occurs to me that one of the failures of 3D was that when you're using it at home, you required people to put on glasses. And the glasses were a huge drawback, especially the active glasses as opposed to the passive. So considering the bizarre market there are in headsets right now for 3D, Microsoft Xbox doesn't have 3D, but they're selling MR headset. But you have the Google Gear or the Oculus portables, and you have the big HTC Vive. So you have this wide variety of headphones out there, or headsets out there. Will the headsets themselves be a roadblock to widespread adoption, consumer adoption of VR, or will VR turn into the same way that 3D did? People are willing to go places and put on glasses, like a movie theater, and in New York there are a couple of VR, like VR World down by the park table. Will people want to go out to do VR as opposed to having put all the stuff and put up all the sensors at home? How much of a roadblock is that headset to really having this market become as mainstream as it is in, say, Ready Player One, for instance?
Okay, so the question for the folks online is looking at 3D versus VR. 3D, one of the major obstacles was wearing glasses. And the question is then with VR, will headsets be one of the obstacles, or will it be like 3D where you go to a movie now and you put on the 3D glasses rather than having them at home? Will that be the same for VR? Will you have to go to a destination like a theater like VR World near Times Square, or is that where it was? Empire State Building, thank you. Will you go to a destination to do that, and will it not really catch on with the folks who are at home or at work? So who would like to field that first?
I'll throw my opinion in on that. Absolutely, if the technology existed today to have a VR experience without any sort of headset, then of course that would be huge. But unfortunately, that technology doesn't exist. Things have gotten quite smaller since the first VR demo I saw that was running on an SGI Silicon Graphics machine the size of a refrigerator and had a headset that was gigantic and even supported by its own tether. So I think things have come quite far.
1993.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, SIGGRAPH. So I think that yes, it's an impediment. People don't like to necessarily put stuff on unless it's part of I don't know the right terminology, but there's sort of this idea of like a ritual, I guess, is maybe what I'm thinking of. And so when you go to a place like a movie theater or to a VR world and you get into a haptic bubble kind of thing, like I saw at NAB this year, or you put on a headset and it's part of the ritual, then yeah, people are easy and willing to do that. The fact that you have to do that at home, I think without a doubt has slowed the market demand, but people are still willing to do it. It's you gotta partake in that right now if you want the experience.
I love the question, sir. Very well stated. Let me break it down into two parts. I don't believe that there was any benefit to having the headset on to see 3D television or 3D movies. I personally hate the false 3D effect. And I think about 15% of the population is with me, and that either the effect doesn't work at all or it causes discomfort. So it's not just that I don't enjoy it and see a benefit, I see a negative. So I don't go to 3D cinemas, et cetera. But even those that do like the 3D, the simulated stereo effect of 3D, of a left-right eye separation, that's kind of a accent grave on top of the video, as opposed to a completely different medium and experience. I think VR and immersive VR is akin to like the shift from vaudeville to the cinema. And we're in this first phase here, just like if we went back to 1896, 1897, the first uses of the cinema camera was just to point it at the vaudeville stage and record it and play it back, right? Or hey, workers leaving the factory, or a train arriving at the station. That was the full extent of the creative options, because people were using as a frame of reference the storytelling that we had seen for 30,000 years of human history around a campfire. It took some unique auteur vision to kind of start to use the camera and post-production and other effects of the cinema to start to develop the language of cinema. And that's a unique language. It tells different stories in a different way. VR, similarly, will break with cinema. It's not just cinema that's now spherical. It's a completely different medium. It tells you a different story in a different way. It makes you feel differently about it. Again, back to presence and empathy in particular. So putting on a headset, if all it is a kind of variation of cinema, yes, I think that the physicality of putting on something on your head is an obstacle. And in that sense, I agree with your metaphor. However, because I don't see this as being another variation of cinema, I don't think that the obstacle of putting something on your face to see cinema is a good corollary. I think that you will put something on your face to have a completely different experience, and that would be the value out of the motivation. By the way, you can experience virtual reality and immersive content projected onto walls as well. It doesn't have to be projected on your eyelid in a headset. Something just opened up in Seattle a week ago called the Holodome. The Holodome is a geodesic dome that fits about 6 people inside of it. It's essentially a 360 video projected onto walls around us. So if we're in the Holodome together and we're watching a Justin Timberlake music video, which is one of the 4 pieces, I actually have 220 degrees field of view, so I can see more of the sphere. I see you in the sphere with me, so we're having a shared experience. I can actually interact and turn around and see behind you and see what you see behind me. So it's a very different way to consume the same piece of media. So I also think of that as a kind of extended reality or XR experience. So AR, VR, these like mixed reality projected environments, all of these are modalities. So it doesn't have to be headset-based, although I think headset-based is going to be the norm, because I think the headsets will be about the size of your glasses, maybe a little bit more than the weight of your current glasses, with the ability to go between an augmented view and a virtual view, which is just an opacity on augmented. I think that's the form factor that we all dream of, and Ready Player One kind of suggests as well.
Yeah, I mean, just the way we've creating content for this medium has changed in the last just 3 years. I mean, it went from you had to have these crazy GoPro rigs all put together to now you can just buy something from Best Buy or for for $100, and it's a handheld, and you can have 360 video. And so I think as the technology evolves, as content creators get the ability to sort of get exposure to more of these tools that become easier to use, from a consumer end, headsets will get more portable, smaller, better. And it's all just going to come together, and I think that's where it really stands out. It is a new type of medium, it's a new type of narratives, and we're just very early on in the game.
So a minute ago, I asked you about where you're seeing the strongest growth. Can you at all talk about what are the factors driving the growth that you're seeing?
Driving the growth of content, or what specifically, or adoption?
Growth of adoption, yeah, VR 360 adoption.
From a content production standpoint, especially since we focus on live, there's still a number of, doing it live and streaming is still pretty difficult. There's the increased complexity of having multiple rigs for 360 and how you switch that and how you produce that live. I've seen it done, and I've seen it done very well, so it's certainly possible. And then there's sort of engineering hurdles, such as needing more on-site bandwidth to transport larger streams. VR does not, and 360 video don't work very well if you're at a resolution of less than 4K, and they don't even, it's debatable whether 4K is even enough. I know we were talking earlier about 8K is certainly considered to be one of the better spots. So, from live, we're still seeing a lot of engineering roadblocks that are inhibiting adoption.
I think that's true about all production: cameras, stitching, editing, titles, graphics, interactivity. Like, all those technologies aren't mature, so there's cost and complexity, and that gets in the way of experimentation. That gets in the way of there being compelling content, which gets in the way of consumer adoption, because there's no compelling content, and you have this flywheel problem, chicken and egg problem.
Right.
But we've seen this before with media. Color television in 1965 was probably a similar problem. There was a lot of color TVs, no color content. as an industry, we'll figure it out, but it's going to take some time.
So it's an interesting balance here, I guess, because Raj was talking about how more and more folks can create content using $100 cameras that they either snap onto their iPhone or just hold over their head. Yet at the same time, at the high end, we still have technical challenges for the really good immersive scenarios. Are we seeing growth just from consumer usage of even the low resolution content? Or are we seeing actual growth as well at the higher end with, stories that are being narrated well or told in a different way?
I mean, I think it's like they're all coming together. It's not just like this one avenue, in my opinion, that's like, here's 360 video really quick that you can put together and post on Facebook, to like something where if you're using a Lytro or a volumetric camera to create some more highly produced piece, that has its own advantages there and creates a different type of a narrative or immersive experience that you can't get with a handheld. It's all sort of kind of like meeting together. It's bunch of different things happening at the same time. So I don't think it's just one thing. It's going to be a few different things that are going to happen that's going to like really drive the growth.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really feel like content is the problem right now. I feel like it's the headsets or like the way in which you consume it is the problem. And then there's different ways in which to consume it that are emerging now, like on your phone or through portals or like through filters and lenses and things like that that are going to convince people to get into headsets more often because they'll be more used to like altering their reality, so to speak. So I feel like there's lots of content being created. There's going to be even more content created. It's only getting better. The tools around this are getting easier to work with. Like more people are going to be able to build, or more people are already able to build for this. And so it's really exciting. It's just a matter of, okay, like how do people consume it? And I think for the last 2 years, it was mostly focused on headsets, and what we're realizing, okay, headsets might take a little bit longer, and yes, that is the future that we will all be living in, but it's not necessarily happening right now. So like things like projections are really interesting to people because suddenly, imagine if you're Google Home, I'm sure they're going to add some sort of projector, and then the first thing you have is like a hologram or like something that you talk to, and it displays a little character, and then projection gets better, and suddenly like your entire house can be transformed into something else. And I feel like that's an evolution leading up until when we have headsets.
I think that content production sort of at the, I don't want to say amateur in like a mean way, but sort of, people taking a camera out and shooting something on the street and putting it on YouTube. I think that eventually drives production at the higher end. I have a couple of different creative agencies that I work with, and they come up with concepts and pitch them to clients, and then they bring us in to help with that execution. Those agencies are staffed by people that consume content online themselves. So if they're seeing, I think, more and more content of a 360 or VR nature, that will kind of percolate up to content ideas and creative ideas and experiential activations at the higher end and for product marketing.
I completely agree. I have a 16-year-old son who's very into cinema, wants to go to film school. He already has developed an incredible canny sense for like how cinema language works, and he shoots film and edits film because he's watched a lot of film. He doesn't have, as a reference, somewhere to go watch a bunch of 360 video and understand the best practices. So everyone has to kind of like on their own be the genius creative force to figure out how to use the medium. There really is this creative iteration process necessary, and I think the cost and complexity gets in the way. I think it will be film students today, not Spielberg, who went on record early and said this medium sucks and it's not going to be any good for storytelling, because the tricks of the trade that he developed in his craft over his career don't apply inside of a 360 media. In 360 media, those rules don't work. You can't do editing. You can't move the camera. There's all the vernacular of cinema doesn't work. You have to start from scratch and think about what can you uniquely do with this medium and teleport the viewer, make them feel something. And that might be someone who's less accustomed to cinema, less vested in cinema as a medium and as a business, and open to experimentation with something brand new. So I'm looking to 22-year-olds to figure it out, not Spielberg.
Right. So with that in mind, I guess, how easy or hard is it for a content creator to get started? And what software and hardware do they need to really create compelling content?
What do you mean by compelling?
I'll let that be subjective. You can define it however you
Creatively, I mean, as Raj said, you can get a $100 camera and use your iPhone and edit on the iPhone and and be a storyteller in the medium. If the camera's not locked down and I see that content in a headset, I will vomit. I've had this happen a couple of times to me. The horizon has to be level. There can't be acceleration of camera movement, if at all, and I prefer the camera not to move at all. So generally, if you're using a attachment on your phone, you're going to break all those rules. You're going to make me sick, not compelling to me, and a meaningful portion of the population. So I think that there's like creative exploration can be done very easily. Getting to good content, though, still requires some thoughtfulness and technical cost. I think 8K and above is where you start. I think 16K video is really necessary to deliver the experience. You know, and I look at the room, I think a lot of people were in this business or aware of this business in 2002 and 2003. And if we talk about streaming media back then, you know, we were talking about things this big.
Postage stamp video.
320 by 120, you know, 15 FPS, you know, basic JPEG algorithms. And that video doesn't look anything like the amazing video we're now seeing, larger screens, much richer, higher frame rates, et cetera. So we have to assume that's going to happen here as well. I think if in 10 years we're at this conference, we're talking about streaming 360, it's going to be 16K resolution, fellas. Like that literally has to happen to kind of fully realize the potential of this medium. It's not going to be 4K, it's not going to be 8K. So you have to take that leap of faith that technology is going to continue to evolve and we'll get to that level. And then you have to kind of be crazy to not think that's going to be incredibly compelling. Imagine a 16K, you know, spherical immersive video with depth, not just stereo left-right depth, but depth, where there's actually dimensional information and you can have parallax when you move your head. That's where this is all headed. This is the early days of that.
Yeah, I mean, with some of the lower end or more cost-effective devices like the Insta360 or Samsung Gears, I think it really helps anyone who's like just thinking about this field, thinking about this medium, to just like try one of those cameras, and really helps you really think about what is, you know, 360 narratives look like. You know, how do you think beyond the frame, and be able to sort of create worlds and paint, you know, looking at the world, and it's your own, it's the canvas around you, and so be able to direct a viewer's attention to look around rather than just like look this way. And so the handheld cameras are a great start, but you know, working its way up to the higher end and more sort of immersive formats is that's, you know, where you'll start to really think about presence and empathy and user agency to like sort of how do you interact with 360 environments and be able to pick up this glass like if it was real, and like what does that feel like, and so that's sort of like the Ready Player One sort of future I'm like really looking forward to, where you can just put on a headset and just like be in a different world and then take it off and you're back, be able to go to different galaxies far away and be able to like just have your own adventures.
Okay. What do you recommend for viewers who want to get started? You know, if somebody wants to start experiencing 360 video, is there a recommended way that you would say they should do it? You know, can they just go with, you know, cardboard and a phone, or do you recommend that they wear something else, that they, you know, wait for the Ready Player One haptic suits to come out? What do you suggest as far as a way to really get into these immersive experiences?
You can go to surf.com, SVRF.com, and search anything, and it'll only be immersive content. So that's one way to do it, and you can view that on any platform. So you can do it on your mobile phone, you can do it on your desktop, you can do it in VR.
But do you recommend a certain way for the best experience?
It depends. Like, I think that for me, and I have every single headset, like if I really, really want to go in VR, I'll go in VR. But in order to convince me to go in VR, I have to see what it looks like without it being in VR. So if you're convinced, then you can view it in VR. But because I think like discovery inside of headset is also not that great. Like sometimes if you know what you're doing, then suddenly you're like downloading something or like downloading an application, or like and all you want to do is just get into content. And so I recommend like just going the easiest route, and then if you're convinced, then go into a headset.
Okay. Other thoughts on that?
I was just thinking about I was laughing about now you can experience application downloads and
Yeah.
immersively.
Literally the worst. You're like, cool, I'm going to wait a minute now, and now I'm going to put the headset off, and I'm going to get my phone, and then you forget about it. So
Cardboard and those type of devices did not wow me. I kind of felt like that was like But when I got the Samsung Gear and I tried that out for the first time, it was like, okay, there is something here.
I did cardboard, and I was like, okay, I gotta get in. So I had the opposite.
Okay, so different. And then you were talking about the Go at lunch, right? So I haven't tried the Go yet, but it seems like that might be the way.
This is the Oculus Go.
Yeah, not only should you buy one for yourself, you should buy one for your relatives, like immediately.
And this is a $199 headset, is that right?
It's just a very disposable price point, $199. You know, if you think about the things you spend $199 on, this is a great, assuming everyone's in the industry in some form, it's a great way to get familiar with the state of the art today, what it could be, get familiar with that, you know, not only hearing it from Sophia, but try to download an app inside of that app store in there, like get familiar with that, see what that's like, because to the extent that you're trying to build experiences for consumers, you can understand some of the obstacles, and it's not just you put on the headset and it's there. There are some obstacles or some usability challenges. So I think it's a great place to get started as an industry, understanding the VR medium, if we're talking about VR and headset. If we're talking about watching a ABC News piece of content on Facebook and YouTube, I'm hoping most people have seen that already. Again, I personally don't think that that has legs. It's kind of a thing, but the really interesting thing is being in a headset and being immersed. And at $199 price point, if this was 2 weeks ago, you were looking at $800 to get started. Now it's $199 for a really nice device that just shipped. And I'm hopeful that this year we'll see 10 million plus of those things sell. Facebook will probably be advertising them, you know, to consumers. There's been really great reviews in the New York Times, Washington Post. In some ways, it is kind of like the next chapter of VR. We'll see what happens with the Oculus Go. But the last 2 years, those headsets were kind of like the V1 of this generation, because to your point, it's been around since the 90s or the 60s in some cases. DARPA was working with VR in the 60s. I think that this Oculus Go headset is the beginning of the next wave, and it's a really great place to start to experiment.
Okay, we had a question in the audience.
Yeah, I guess this following up on the Oculus Go, because you know we got the Red, we got the Microsoft Media, and all these great devices. They're a lot of fun, but it's really for crazy people who like messing around with powerful PCs and wires. And so the Oculus Go, being the first kind of really inexpensive $200 device, I say as a developer, I need people to buy these things. I need to deliver something to them. So I remember bought one last week, and within a day or two, I went and bought one for the wife, which she wanted, and of course my nephew, everybody in the family.
Good for you, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
Because some people would like put it on and watch Netflix and so on. And I said, well, I got a 75-inch 4K television downstairs. Why the hell am I going to go put on this thing to watch Netflix? So the other day, I was already in bed, so I took that and I finished watching the episode I didn't get to finish. And then I watched the next one. So, because it's a hell lot easier just putting it on in bed and going downstairs and turning on the TV and wake up the wife. Well, she doesn't let me play any games. But at the end of the day, it's just really convenient. It's just no wires, you put it on, and battery life could be better, but it's a great way to experience it, and there's a lot of junk out there, there's some good stuff, and it's gonna get better. And I think, I'm hoping that forces all the other guys to start saying, this is what we need to do. We need a wireless experience, and we need it to be cheap enough for people to jump on it. So I'm excited about that.
Okay, so let me summarize that. You bought the Oculus Go, you immediately went out and bought more for family members because they liked it, and you found the convenience of it very good, not only for 360 content, but even just for watching normal content, like when you're in bed finishing off that Netflix content that you started on your 75-inch TV.
My brother would pop in and so on, we would watch and stuff together, playing games together.
Okay, cool, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I do think that content drives the experience. I'm very much into all of this on PlayStation VR and all. There, an experience where it's just VR are not compelling. I'm Batman and I can't move, and I'm putting on my back glove, my Batman. That's not so fun. But there is some horror video game or some zombie movies jumping on my face, and I can't look away like in an old movie because it's all around me. It's way more scary, way more exciting. But I work for a company called Test
Okay, so for our online audience, we had a number of comments there about various aspects of using VR headset. The fact that make it much more immersive. When somebody jumps at you in a movie, it can be you can't look away now because you're really immersed in it. But at the same time, because you're wearing a headset, it's very isolating from the real people around you in real life. And wouldn't it be kind of cool if we had experiences where not only could you have that immersive experience, but you could still communicate with the people around you very easily? Did I sort of capture the essence of it for online?
An observation,
Go
you
ahead.
know, I have teenage boys, and the way we use phones, I was just in New York with my wife, because this is exotic for us to come to New York. We went to a really nice restaurant last night. Really nice restaurant, Michelin star restaurant. People are on their phones, looking at the phones, taking pictures of their food. Like that, 10 years ago, that would have been anathema. You would never have brought an electronics thing out at a Michelin star restaurant.
It's still it.
Everyone was using their phones, my wife and I included. That whole, and maybe you've seen the cartoons about like the evolution of the human species. Our necks are getting really thick because we're looking down at our phones so much. So sir, your comment about like putting on a headset and that feeling antisocial, or maybe that's something you don't want to do, you're not comfortable doing. I would say that putting on headsets, especially you wear glasses, I don't. Wearing glasses that are light, that have this opaque, transparent modality, I'm assuming that's going to happen. It's going to take some time, but it's going to happen. And I think to think that doing VR or using augmented reality as part of your kind of interactions in life, including at Michelin star restaurants, it's going to happen. And the fact that it happened with mobile phones, in some ways, looking at a phone is as isolating as at the family dinner. My teenagers come home from school, we made a nice dinner, we sit down, it's family time, we've tried to say no phones at the dinner table, we failed as parents. They look at their phones, and they might as well be in a headset. It's just as isolating. So I actually don't think that the headset itself is going to be isolating or perceived as being isolating for very much longer. If there's compelling content in there, I think we'll adapt to find ways to allow that into kind of how we consume content.
I think this.
There's some, yes, you don't get hit by a car. There's some danger to being in the headset, yes. Or getting mugged. I was on the subway with my Oculus Go in New York, and I did not want to put on my Oculus Go on the subway. Felt like that would have been playing with fire.
Can we stay on the shared experience thing for just a minute? Because I think the point you brought up about the isolation, and you mentioned earlier shared experience, it reminded me that we found in the live concert space with pay-per-view and subscription services for live streaming concerts of touring bands, there's kind of this concept of couch tour, and it functions for a lot of people in much the same way as having your buddies over to watch the game or watch the fight. So people will invite friends over and throw a mini party and put the concert on large screen TV, good sound system, that sort of thing. How do we, within the immersive experience, still sort of have that communal experience? I mean, we mentioned like the igloo and the projection kind of thing, but sort of from a home gamer standpoint, how do we kind of eliminate the isolation so that we can still have a shared experience of watching some content together while it being immersive?
I mean, I hang out in VR with friends probably like once a week. And these are people that we don't live in the same place, and we will
Sure.
go and like explore worlds together or like view content. And it's crazy because I feel like I'm actually hanging out with them. Yes, there's like some weird things around like it's not entirely looks like them, like tracking can get messed up, but it's better than a phone call, and we can like go and do things together. And I
What do
think
you use, VR chat or?
VR chat mostly, and then Rec Room second. VR chat is a social application. You can just put it on a headset. And like, what's cool is I'm with my friend, and then suddenly we like meet someone else, and they like join us, and for a little bit, and that's like a little bit weirder. With Rec Room, it's more like I'm just like hanging out with my friend and playing games and stuff.
So are you actually listening to each other, or do you see an
I'm
avatar of
I
each
see an
other?
avatar, yeah.
Okay.
So, and you can talk to other people. There's other people there, but I'm mostly there to like hang out with my friend. And I hang out with probably 3 different people in VR because a lot of my friends don't live in New York. They live in California. So it's like my way of keeping in touch with them. And I found that that's the most convincing way to get me into VR. It's like if I'm gonna hang out with someone that I maybe couldn't see in person, and it's just like very convincing. So I feel like the social aspect, there's a bunch of different companies working in the social space. The idea of like watching something with somebody else like through this avatar is going to become increasingly normalized, especially as things like Bitmoji and Facebook just launched like Facebook avatars. So the idea that you turn yourself into something digital is going to become a norm, and so suddenly your representation of a self, whether that's an avatar that looks like you or like a cat or whatever, like that is going to become very normal. And so the transience between like you just like using this avatar in messaging to like going into VR is going to become increasingly normal. And that like socialness or the like sociability of this content and experiencing with others then therefore gets eliminated. And is already being eliminated. Like I do this literally at least once a week, and it's like pretty normal for me now, which is, I mean, I'm obviously on like the extreme end of spectrum of like early adopter. But eventually it all trickles down.
But I think it intersects with streaming media. So back to sports, I'm a Bay Area native, so I follow Bay Area sports teams. I live in Seattle. When the Golden State Warriors are playing, I want to watch with friends. I don't want to just watch in my media room alone, although I sometimes do. So being able to go into an avatar-based environment with some of my high school or college buddies and watch a streaming basketball game, sign me up tomorrow.
Have you tried Live Like?
I have
Or
not.
NextVR?
I've definitely done the NextVR thing, which does the basketball game, but not the social mixture. I think those will kind of mix soon.
Yeah, I think in NextVR now with Oculus, Facebook Spaces or what, like
Rooms, Facebook
Arena
Rooms.
or whatever they
Yeah.
called it, so you can now do that.
Yeah, but far from being less social, I think VR media consumption will be more social.
Totally.
But
Because
how
it's
do
more
we
connected.
how do we bridge it to where you actually, when you have people over in your media room at your house?
That hasn't happened, other than
Okay.
the Super Bowl, that hasn't happened in 10 years. That's a myth. Nobody has people over to their media rooms, do they? Here you're first, guys and gals. Media rooms will disappear from the American architectural design for homes because this idea of like a huge screen. Who watches big screens anymore? I mean, my teenagers don't. Okay, but you're dating yourselves, right? Like my wife and I watch in our bedroom because the family room, the kids are never there. So why go to the family room? There's no family there, right? They're in their bedrooms with their YouTube on their phones. So I think that the idea of a projection couch projector large screen, like that's dead. Like I don't think Sony's selling any more TVs like that, and it's going to move to much more personal, handheld, on your face kind of media consumption.
Okay. And, for our last question, if you could each try in about 30 seconds here, wrap it up with, tell us what you think one or two best practices are that can help us, that might be helpful for the audience as they consider getting into VR 360 content creation.
Just buy a handheld camera to start with and start editing footage and understand what does it take to create like stories within a 360 environment. I mean, I think that's like the best first step you can do.
Google Dan Harmon's world building piece, and he tells you how to construct worlds. Because I think in 360 and 3D, you need to, like you're creating an environment, you're creating an experience, you're not just creating something that somebody will passively watch. And Dan Harmon, also co-creator of Rick and Morty, I'm sorry, huge Rick and Morty fan, but his, like, how do you build a world? Like, there's 4 different blog posts are actually super, super helpful and tactful. We, like, constantly reference it when we create anything.
Okay.
I would say get a headset so that you can consume the content properly, even if it's the content you're making. And for 2, I would say don't fall into the trap of, the way I've been explaining it lately, which maybe isn't the best metaphor, is don't make radio for TV. And that's sort of realize that you're moving to a new form of narrative and kind of put a little bit of effort in that so that you had a good corollary to that with like don't make vaudeville or don't make film for vaudeville, right? And I've been saying don't make radio for TV, and it's recognize that you're working in a different medium now.
Yeah, I think just because of when we were all born, I think the last century of time was the century of the cinema. Assume, just for creative purposes, that the next century is a century of XR or immersive storytelling, and think of it as that big of a break in the creative process. Technical process, good news, is a lot of the same stuff. There's a lot of the skills that we've developed as an industry with encoding and post-production are similar. There's going to be order of magnitude bigger frames, et cetera, but it's generally the same thing. But creatively, I think as we all just said, totally different game. Approach it with that curiosity, and it'll be more interesting and fun.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you for showing up. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to come up to us. We'll stay around for a few minutes afterwards and enjoy the rest of the show.